Welcome back to the Bench to Boardroom podcast. I'm your host, Cynthia Steele. We did take a little break after our ARVO recordings because, well, we needed to recover. And we are back with a phenomenal episode today. I know I say that about all the episodes, but today's you're going to want to listen to a couple of times. It's phenomenal. And today's guest is Dr. Kristen Herring, who has a PhD in biochemistry from Vanderbilt University. And what makes Kristin such a fascinating guest is she is the first person I've interviewed who has had a career in government using her PhD in biochemistry. So early on at Vanderbilt, she realized that a career in academics wasn't for her. And towards the end of her time, she applied for and became a presidential management fellow. And you can find out more information about that. Anyone within a year before graduating or within 2 years post-graduation is eligible to apply. And you can find out more information at pmf.gov. So again, pmf.gov. So as a presidential management fellow, Kristin was exposed to so many opportunities in government using science. And so she worked at the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, which she refers to as DTRA. She worked at the Secret Service, which is very, very cool. And now she and I work together at the same agency called ARPA-H. So I really want to emphasize, before we get going, I really want to emphasize to all of you, there are positions out there and you do qualify, even if you're looking at it from the outside saying, what the heck would the Secret Service want with someone with expertise in biochemistry? They do. And you should just apply anyway. And I'm going to let Kristin tell you more because her career path is absolutely fascinating. So if you don't believe me, believe Dr. Kristen Herring. Dr. Kristen Herring, welcome to Bench to Boardroom.
Thank you. Thanks.
I am so excited to have you here because I think your career trajectory is so freaking cool, and I think I think my guests are going to find it really, really cool too. So,
I'm glad somebody thinks it's cool because at the time, like when I was going through it, I was like, "What is it?" Especially my parents are like, "What are you doing? Like, get a job and stay at it, please." So,
you're in good company because honestly, maybe you find it difficult too. But like we work at the same government agency now as contractors, and I had the hardest time explaining what we do to like my parents. My parents definitely don't get it. Most people don't get it.
Yeah, same.
So you're in good company. My parents sat in for my dissertation defense, and I'm pretty sure they just like smiled and nodded, and thumbs up. Like that was.
Yeah, my dad definitely tried to understand like the entire 5 years I was in school. He's like, "Now explain to me again."
But see, I like people who do that because I'll do that too. Like, explain to me like I'm a high school freshman. Okay, explain to me like I'm in 6th grade, and then we just keep going backwards until I finally understand. So,
yeah.
Anyway, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience before we get carried away?
Yeah, of course. So, Kristen Herring. I am currently a contractor at ARPA-H, Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health. I got my bachelor's at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, and then went on to get my PhD in biochemistry at Vanderbilt University. So, yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. We're so excited to have you. So I guess my first question is like, what got you interested in science and what got you interested in chemistry?
So this is a true story. A lot of people are like, what? This makes no sense. So high school, I loved soap operas because my mom and my grandmother watched soap operas. And so our soap opera of choice was General Hospital.
I was going to ask.
And General Hospital. So this is at the time, right? Like AIDS epidemic was, huge thing. And so one of the characters on General Hospital, Robin, who was, I think at the time she was a teenager. So she was a little bit older than me, but not much older. She ended up getting HIV, and it was just like devastating, right? This is a character that I was attached to. So I was just like, I want to do research so I can find a cure for AIDS to help Robin. I mean, I understood that like this wasn't a real person, but
Right.
still. So that is 100% the reason that I wanted to do research.
Wow.
And I knew I enjoyed science and math, but like that was it for me. I was like, I'm gonna do AIDS research. Like that's what I entered graduate school saying I was gonna do.
Mhm.
Didn't end up doing it, but yeah, that's why, because of soap operas. So yeah, TV can
Wow.
be good for something.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, most of us have some kind of a personal story like that. Either, we saw a movie do you remember the movie regarding Henry
Yes,
with Harrison Ford?
yes,
Yes, I
yes,
I love that movie. I thought it was fascinating how, a frontal lobe injury could cause these like
yeah.
crazy personality changes. Or the other one that I used to really appreciate, but it always made me cry was Lorenzo's Oil.
Oh,
Because here's somebody who tries to figure out like exactly which lipid or which component of myelin is missing in his child. And it
yeah,
was it would always make me cry, but it was always so interesting to think like, wow, this one thing can cause this crazy
yep,
devastating phenotype. So yeah, I think those are the best kind of movies that do that.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Or TV shows in your case. I
Yeah.
love it. So then, did you end up doing HIV research?
I did not. So at Vanderbilt, and one of the reasons why I chose Vanderbilt was because, even though I knew, yes, I wanted to do AIDS research, I didn't, I really wanted to see what else was out there to do. So
Mhm.
Vanderbilt, your first year, you enter into an interdisciplinary program. And so basically you take modules of lots of different things, which was great because at Spelman, I was a biochemistry major, but really at the time it was more of a track, right? So it was really a chemistry degree where we took maybe two biochem classes, right? So I was like, well, I need to actually know what other areas of biomedical research are there. And so in the interdisciplinary graduate program, IGP at Vanderbilt, we did, like 6 to 8 weeks of endocrinology. We did immunology, like, so all those different things. And so also as part of that, you had an opportunity to rotate. I think it was within 3 to 4 laboratories before you actually had to decide which lab you wanted to do research in. And I actually, no, I don't think I actually did a rotation in an HIV lab at all. I did one in like a endocrinology lab. So it was like a diabetes lab with dogs, which was very interesting. Yeah, like we did research on beagles, which, at the time I didn't I have a dog now, but at the time I didn't have a pet. I was like, oh, it's no problem. I can handle it. And I remember the very first day I had to go in and they were like, okay, well, we do surgeries on the animals. We have to do it really early because people don't do too well when they see beagles right coming down the
True.
hall. So right,
True.
so we get there 4 o'clock in the morning, do surgeries, and so we're sitting up there, and they said, "Well, here's a chair for you because you're likely going to get lightheaded because it's going to be too much." I was like, "What are you talking about? I'm fine. I'll be fine." Sure enough, like I don't know, maybe 20, 30 minutes into it, I was like, "Yeah, this is too much. I can't do this." And it was
Hmm.
like, like doing the research, and then you have to sacrifice the dogs at the end of the day. It was
Yeah.
just too much. So yeah, decided didn't really want to do that. Like I couldn't do that for 5 years, that sort of research. I can't even remember what the other laboratory I was in, like other rotation, but the one I ended up doing was a mass spectrometry lab. And so, really more analytical chemistry, but applying it to solve biological problems. And so I was in a MALDI mass spectrometry laboratory. So
Okay.
MALDI is matrix assisted laser desorption ionization. So basically, think about right shooting a laser at a tissue, and you have a matrix, some sort of solvent that will co-crystallize with whatever is in the tissue to absorb some of the energy from the laser. And then once the laser hits it and it fires everything off, you are able to get whatever's in the tissue off to travel down to measure the mass. And so we use it in our laboratory to construct images of tissues, disease states. And so my research was looking at protein markers of drug induced kidney toxicity. So antibiotics are notorious for damaging your kidneys. And so we were trying to, figure out, what could we learn from the proteome, right? Using proteomics and imaging to, kind of figure out, are there early predictors that would say, okay, this drug is going to end up, causing nephrotoxicity. So that's the laboratory that I ended up in. It was really cool. I got an opportunity to work with some pharmaceutical companies, because at the time they were really just using radio labeling, which is great, except that really when you construct those images, you are following that tag, so you don't actually know if the drug is actually still attached to it, right? Could be metabolized, it could have fallen off. And so using MALDI mass spectrometry, because the molecular weight of the drug or protein, whatever it is that you're tracking, that is actually what you're seeing in the image. So yeah, that was my graduate work. Enjoyed it. Yeah.
Now, I hear you there, and I apologize to anyone who may have been offended by the mention of research in beagle dogs. I personally don't talk about it very much in this house. We have 3 dogs, but
Uh,
no, that's why I did cell work.
mm,
I couldn't even inject rats. I hated it.
oh,
That it made
yeah,
me so sad.
yeah,
Mm.
that was
They they
horrible.
they squeaked, they moved, they were, mad, and then I was upset, and it just was a disaster. So ultimately, I was really drawn to my area of research, in part because I thought it was fascinating, but it meant I could just grow like immortalized human cells and occasionally get like primary tissue from, discarded, rims of people's corneas and things like that. So like, okay, I don't have to deal with animals. I don't have to deal with, cleaning cages or any behavior
Yep.
things. And I don't have to go home feeling horribly guilty every day, and it was all those things. So you are in good company when it comes to that. And so I guess like while you're doing all this MALDI research, which thank you for the reminder. I was trying to dig in my memory. Like I remember the term, but it's one of those things when I read it in a paper, I kind of gloss over it, like, right, chemistry, chemistry, chemistry. And
Yep.
I'm a cell biologist. I think of
Understand.
things larger than,
Yep.
than where the
Yep.
electrons
Completely
go.
understand.
But while you're doing this, I mean, on those days that and I ask everyone this question, on those days where you were like, forget it, I'm done, I cannot do this anymore, what were you going to run off and do? What was your fantasy?
so so it's funny you ask, because like literally, I don't know, it probably was my second or third day of graduate school. I was like, I don't think I want to do this. This isn't, I can't do this all day every day. Like, what did I get myself into? What else can I do where my
Mm-hmm.
family won't feel like I was a failure? That sort of thing. And so my classmates, I had 2 other classmates, and there was a McDonald's on Vanderbilt's campus, and I kid you not, we would meet up in at least once a week and talk about, okay, what other job are we going to do? And so we went through several iterations. We were going to own, so at the time, I can't remember the name of the women's gym. I was like, I can just franchise a women's gym. It's
Yeah.
like low overhead. I can find some people who work that. It'll be fine. Then we were like, oh, maybe we could own a CC's Pizza. It's like, oh, that seems like a lot of work. Like we have to have employees. Like then I was like, well, there was a point in time where I thought about being a pharmacist. I was like, so maybe I would go do pharmacy school. But I had a friend who was in pharmacy school, and she's like, this really isn't any better. You should just probably stay where you are. So yeah, those are the top 3 things that I discussed doing.
I know, and I love that because so far, almost everyone I've asked, it's been some sort of a service-based position that they want. Something
Yep.
that relatively simple, and maybe you have customers, but for the most part, your customers are happy. And if say you put like too much pepperoni on a pizza, that's not going to destroy your entire day. Your customer's probably going to
Exactly.
be happy about that.
Exactly. Yeah.
You open the gym and maybe it's like a degree like too warm or too cold. Like, okay,
Yeah.
I'll just adjust
It's
that. It's
fine.
an easy fixable problem.
Yeah.
I
It's
love it.
fine. Yeah.
I love it. Exactly. Mine was my very first guest on this podcast ever, Dr. Alicia Case, and I. We were going to open a cupcake shop. Like that was our thing.
Ah.
Every time we would go to this one local meeting, we would meet up at a cupcake shop just to get like a really fancy red velvet and like a cup of coffee, and we would just watch these people like we could do this. We could totally do this, and just make the cupcakes and you fill them and then people come and then they leave happy and like this sounds lovely.
So what made you stay? I'm just always
Oh,
curious. Like when you know.
I think it was the good days. The good days outweighed the bad. And
Right.
for me, that was like my relationship with research up until a point where I was like, I'm sick of riding the feast or famine. It was really the grants and the funding and like thinking about the future that really made me think, all right, I need to switch over to industry because I don't want I can barely deal with this on my own. And one thing my PI used to always tell me is how happy he would be. We were all in our 20s and 30s, and he would say, I'm always so happy when you guys come to me saying, you're engaged, you're pregnant, your wife is pregnant, you're going to start a family, you're
Oh.
buying a house. Like, these are so wonderful, and these things are things that you should be doing. But I never sleep that night because now your salary relies on me,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know?
It's a lot of responsibility.
And I was just like, I can't. I can barely like feed myself and my dog. There's no way I'm going to like deal with that kind of pressure. I just can't. So then, yeah. So I went a different route. But what about you? What kept you in? What kept you every day?
So I don't know, maybe second or third week of graduate school, I saw a flyer
Hmm?
for a meeting on alternative science careers. And I
Okay.
was like, let me go listen to this. And so I was probably the only first year graduate student in there. Everyone else was like fourth or fifth year close,
Hmm?
to defending. And I found out about the Presidential Management Fellows Program. And quite honestly, that is what kept me in graduate school.
I
It
love
was
that.
knowing that there was a light at the end of the tunnel. There were options
And that
that I
is
could pursue.
I love it. And that is the
Yeah.
perfect segue, Kristen, because what is the
Uh,
Presidential Management Fellowship?
Yeah, so the Presidential Management Fellows Program is a program operated out of the Office of Personnel Management within the federal
Mhm.
government. And it was designed to get people who wouldn't normally consider public service or working in the government to actually come to the government. So I think I was the very first person at Vanderbilt to actually go through the program. And they, I think, still to this day are really targeting scientists, because most people are like, why would the government need a scientist unless you are
Yes.
solely doing research? And that's actually not the bulk of the jobs. That's not it at all. And I oftentimes tell people, really what graduate school does for you, regardless of what your dissertation topic is, it teaches you how to think critically. It teaches you how to look at a problem, go through stepwise, figure out how to solve it. And that's really it, which those are skills you can apply to any job. And that's really what the federal government is looking for: problem solvers, people that can, think creatively. And also in graduate school, you learn how to quickly do research, right? And find answers to
Yes.
things. And so, again, you can do that in any field. And so, yeah, I did the Presidential Management Fellows Program. It's a 2-year program.
Mhm.
And at the time, and so it's different than like a AAAS fellowship,
Okay.
which with presidential management fellows, you are considered a government employee from day one. And at the time, as a AAAS fellow, it was really more like a postdoc situation. You
That's it.
only after you place with an agency were you considered a full-time employee. And so the real benefit to the PMF program is that you get to sort of skip that whole USA jobs process that a lot of
Mm.
people, complain about. And so
Yeah.
USA jobs is basically kind of like a black box for people who have never, kind of
Totally.
engaged with it, right? It's
Yes.
this large database of jobs, and you submit your resume. And really, the hardest part is getting, selected or getting put on a cert list, a certification list for an
Mhm.
actual person to even interact with you. And so there are lots of, tips and tricks. People say, make sure you have all of the keywords in your resume so that the computer will pull you out of the pile. And
Yeah.
so the PMF program, you don't have to do any of that. Basically, OPM pre-selects and they say, okay, once you're named a finalist, all government agencies, these individuals are perfectly okay for you. So they send your resume is put in this central repository, and any agency that wants to hire a PMF can just go into this database, pull you out, either say, hey, let's have an interview, or come to us. And so, as part of the program, they have a job fair. And so, again, any agency in the area or not can come to DC. and interview. I interviewed with quite a few agencies I'd never heard of. U.S. Space Missile Defense Agency. I was like, what is this? Why would they want me? I am a chemist, you know. It was interesting though. Interviewed with NIH, but on their communications side. So they needed someone to, you know, be able to speak to the public about science, right? And it is useful to have a scientist to do that, right? But you need to also be able to, you know, convey it at a level that people can understand. All right. And so at the end of that, I did have some offers, but I didn't necessarily think any of them were good or were a perfect fit. And so actually, once I got back to Nashville, I got a phone call from a gentleman who ended up becoming my mentor at the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, which was my first job, you know, as a PMF. He called and said, "Hey, I saw your resume and I wanted to know if you would be interested in talking to me about, you know, possibly working with the Department of Defense." And I was like, "Well, doing what?" Right. So my dad was military. I was like, what is this about? Like, I don't want to do anything offensive. And he's just like, "Well, it's with the Chem Bio Defense program." And so I think I even told him, I was like, "I don't want to develop weapons." And he was like, no, we don't have an offensive program. He was like, "Just let me come out and talk to you." So he actually came from Fort Belvoir, Virginia to Nashville and sat with me in the student center and talked to me about the agency. And that's where we did my interview. Yeah.
That's so cool.
And he absolutely changed the entire trajectory of my career. Like is 100% the reason that I'm sitting here, you know, today, that we're at the same agency now. Yeah. It was with that conversation with him. And so, cool. So yeah, when he taught me through, he's like, "Okay," he's like, "Even if you decide not to come to my agency," he's like, "Here's what you need to look for, you know, when you're talking to people." He's like, "You know, you're in Nashville, you need to ask for relocation." You know, he literally walked through those things. He's like, "They're not going to offer it, but if you ask, then they have to go back to the hiring manager." It's like, "You need to ask for student loan repayment. They're not going to offer, but you need to ask for it." Right. And so I was like, "Oh, this is great information to know," which again, plug for the US government. These are all things that are available to you if you work for the federal government. So yeah, that's how I ended up in the government and, you know, in the Presidential Management Fellows program.
That's so cool. Did you defend before you started the program, or was it part of graduate school?
Yeah, so you have to, you have to defend. So you can apply, I think up to 2 years after you get your degree. But the timing, if you are going to apply before you actually defend, they just, the guidelines are you have to be within 1 year of finishing. We all know, right? What does that mean? Like you might think you're within 1 year, your PI might decide actually you're not. So it's kind of a gamble, but it worked out. So yes, I defended. And then started at Ditcher. I think I defended October, November, and then started at Ditcher in December of 2008.
Okay, so then I guess, is that program still going on? Is the fellowship still going on?
Yeah, it is. You know, let's see, this is June. So the announcement for applications will come out in the fall. Okay. And then so each school has their own process for how they select people. So again, as I said, I was the first scientist to come through Vanderbilt as a Presidential Management Fellow. So there was no process. They were just like, "You want to do it? Okay, go ahead and submit, you know, your application." I do know some schools, and probably now at Vanderbilt, just because it's more well known, some schools will have their own internal selection process. So, you know, I would encourage, you know, those graduate students to, you know, talk to whomever in your office to find out what the process is. But after that, then there's, last time I checked, so they've changed the process several times over the years. There's an online sort of like personality quiz, I guess is the best way to put it, where they ask you, you know, on a scale of like 1 to 5, with 1 being, you know, never, and like 5 being, you know, all the time. How often are you on time? How often, you know, those sort of questions, right? Like just that sort of thing. And then they also, you know, you submit your resume. And then they, scan through those. Again, at one time there was an interview portion
Mhm.
and I actually participated as a interviewer for potential fellows, and they give you a problem, right? I don't
Mm.
know, agency X is, looking at the effect of pollution in this river. They
Mhm.
need $20 million. Leadership is not on board. How would you get them on board, right?
Wow.
So they'll give you time with it, and then you come back and you present. Also, part of that was we wanted to see how you worked in a group because, again, working in federal
Mhm.
government is not an
Mhm.
isolated thing. There's a team, and so which I thought was interesting at the time. We had, I think it was maybe 5 or 6 potential fellows in a room with us, and we just literally watched them brainstorm and figure out how they would solve this. And at the
Cool.
end of the designated time, then they would report back to us how they would do this. So yeah,
Mhm.
it's super cool program.
Yeah.
And yeah, definitely look out in the fall for anyone who's interested.
Yeah.
Once you're named a finalist, you are a finalist for a full year. So even if you aren't able to find a match, right, or a job
Mhm.
immediately, there's a year where an agency can come to you, pull you off the list,
Yeah.
and hire you if they're interested. So yeah.
That's great. And just to go back to what you said about USA Jobs, I completely agree because I technically I was funded by the Department of Veterans Affairs while I was in graduate school, and then I had my own career development award through them. And I just remember looking through USA Jobs and even just trying to decipher, first of all, acronyms. Everything in the government is an acronym, and I think you
Mhm.
tossed out like half a dozen of them during your description. You
Probably.
know, and just because you're this is your career, it just kind
I'm
of
used
rolls
to.
off the tongue. But our agency's website actually has an acronym dictionary which I utilize pretty frequently, and I'm always glad that that's available to us. But at the same time, I mean, even just like pay scales, like what is a GS, what do these
Yep.
different levels mean? And this is what I'm getting paid at now, but do I qualify for something else? And there's no like standard there, and it's so hard to understand. And just like you said, you're approached by Department of Defense and you're like, what the heck do you want with me? I'm a
Exactly.
chemist. So I
Exactly.
I love this idea that you have a little bit more of like a personalized experience, that someone actually is there to speak with you and guide you through it. Because I mean, at this point, I'm guessing you're like just like most of us were in our late 20s, early 30s. Like, I don't know what I'm
Yeah.
doing here. I don't even have
No
benefits yet.
clue.
Like, what's
Exactly.
happening?
Exactly. Yeah, that was
That's
my very first job straight out of graduate school. So I
that's so
didn't,
cool.
do a traditional postdoc. I tell people my postdoc was, working for the first 2 years, as a program manager. I guess the other thing is, the program really seeks to develop the next generation of leaders for the government.
Nice.
And
Hmm.
so I can even say at the Defense Threat Reduction Agency where I started, one of the senior executive service members at the agency is a former presidential management fellow. And
Oh
so
wow.
it's because like they are intentional. That's really what they are designing it for. So whereas you could absolutely apply for a job on USA Jobs and have great success at that, but there is not this mapped out path for you to get to the upper levels of leadership like there is with the Presidential Management Fellows Program. It's recognized within the federal government. So when you come in, people automatically like, oh, okay, well, I can trust you to do this. Let me, take you to this opportunity. There was a requirement at the time when I did it that you had to have at least one external rotation from your agency. Because again, right, someone coming in that knows absolutely nothing about the government, you don't really know how other agencies operate.
Right.
And again, right, they're training you not to have the job that you're hired into, but to be a leader within the federal government. And really, the only way to
Right.
do that is to see how other agencies operate.
Oh,
And
totally.
so, again, because the gentleman John Cannell, who became my mentor, he was just like, I am invested in developing the next generation of leaders at this particular agency. And so he allowed me to do 3 rotations. So 2 of which I did at DITRA within different groups, but I did a rotation at the State Department. So I had an opportunity to see, again, night and day between Department of Defense and Department of State, right? Where
Sure.
state is all about diplomacy and talking and, oh, let's send a strongly worded demarche to this,
Hmm.
country leader versus DOD. It's just like, we're going to have action. We're going to do this now. It's just, night and day.
Uh-huh.
But, it helps with perspective because you can understand, okay, this is the culture of this agency. This is why they do things the way that they do. It's not that it has to be that way, because you'll hear that a lot, right? People say, oh, well, this is policy. It's
Right.
not really policy. This is just culture, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I can't speak any more highly of the program. I recommend it really to to everyone, every graduate student that I know. I'd say, hey, you should consider this, even if you either want to go into academia or you want to go into industry. Just apply. It's just another option for you to have.
That's that's fantastic because I mean, for the most part, unless you're really involved in the government, or maybe if you were raised in like a military family or a family that's heavily involved in public service, I mean, you would not know any of
No,
these
not
things
at all.
existed. That's so cool. So then what did you learn during your fellowship? Like what else were you exposed to? So, DOD and Department of State.
Yeah, yeah. So the other thing is that there's a training requirement tied to the program as well. So
Mhm.
whereas, some agencies, especially with new hires, they might say, oh, well, we don't have the budget, we don't really have the time, we can't allow you, to go to this conference or to do this training.
Sure.
As a requirement of the Presidential Management Fellows Program, the agency knows when they bring you on, you have to have 80 hours of training, and some of these are already predetermined by the program. So it's
Okay.
it's basically um, the the what are they called? They're called ECQs, and I can't remember what the acronym acronym is.
Asking the
Qualifications
wrong person.
for the senior executive service, and because
Mm.
again, they are training you to be at the top levels of government, and
Wow.
so the same classes that someone would take to be an SES, these are the trainings that they are offering to the Presidential Management Fellows.
Oh, cool.
And so it was amazing trainings. And again, I had an opportunity to go to other agencies. So my job at the Defense Threat Reduction Agency was as a program manager. And so, in graduate school, you understand that there is someone at the government who I guess is technically managing this, right? Because
Mhm.
you're submitting updates on your research, that sort of thing. But to realize that after I got to graduate school, I was that person. I was just like, wow, that's pretty cool. And I would even tell my classmates and former lab mates that, yeah, I'm the one that's making funding decisions. I'm the one that's reading proposals. They're like, wait, what?
Really?
Like, how is that possible?
Oh,
Yeah,
oh my
so it
gosh.
was yeah, it was really cool. And at the time I was just like, well, how am I gonna use my MALDI mass
Mhm.
spectrometry background? But one of the very first portfolios that I was assigned to was the diagnostics portfolio at
Okay.
DITRA. And at the time, because imaging mass spectrometry was, so new at the time, so I actually saw a proposal. Someone proposed to do multi-imaging mass spectrometry to find
So,
markers of, injury. And I was like,
yeah,
oh, I can review this. Like that's
yeah,
that's my background. But yeah, I mean, you know this, right? Like every day is something new. Even though,
totally.
yeah, you have your background, but you might get a proposal that's completely orthogonal to anything that you do, and so you do the research,
Yeah.
and you're able to figure it out and see, does this make sense? Is this a good use of
Hmm.
taxpayer dollars? But yeah, it was just great, and just meeting other people, other scientists. Because again, once you're in the government, then you find out, oh, there are other scientists here doing the same thing. Like, why is no one talking about this?
I agree. I mean, since in my 6 or 7 months so far at ARPA-H, I mean, the number of just incredibly intelligent people has been mind blowing. Like the number of people who I have met, like, wait, your degree is in what? Your degree is in neuroscience, and yet you're working at
Yeah,
DoD. You're working with DARPA. Like, how did that happen? So this is super encouraging, I think, and I just want to emphasize it, Kristen, that here you are, you're a chemistry, you're a biochemist, and your dissertation's in all chemistry, and yet you found a path
Hmm.
through the government that utilizes your expertise, but then expands
Yep.
upon your expertise. And I've certainly had those moments where I've kind of looked around and said, like, how did I get here? How did this happen to me? And why are you asking me this? I don't know anything about this, but you're right. The first thing that we learn is to problem solve. And in some ways, we do learn like program management, project management, and that's actually something that was emphasized in a previous episode. Someone said, you are the CEO of your work, so you know how to manage budgets, you know how to manage at least how to manage some people, maybe in a classroom setting, maybe, you've got a tech helping you and whatever, so these are all these little tangible skills that we pick up on just as part of our education that we maybe blow off because we still
Yep.
think of ourselves as like students, trainees, whatever. But you went straight from being someone who writes the grants to someone who reads the grants, and you did it. That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I won't say, it was, there was always a warm reception,
Yeah.
especially right within the DoD, which is very male
Oh,
dominated,
I'm sure.
older male. When I can remember, I went to visit one of the laboratories, and I think, see, I must have been 26, yeah, 26 at the time, right? So I show up, and I probably looked 20
Right.
also. Right. So I show up and they're like, oh, okay, this is your new program manager. And I think one of the gentlemen looked at me and I'm like, this little girl? Like,
Right.
what? Like it's, so yeah, it was definitely an experience.
Wow.
But yeah, I enjoyed every moment
That
of
sounds
it.
terrifying if I'm being honest. Like, hi. I would have
Yeah.
been so intimidated.
No, but it was great, right? Because I had an opportunity to visit the DoD laboratories, visit some of the test sites. So things that I never would have imagined I'd have an opportunity to do, I was
Mm-hmm.
able to do just because I took the chance and took the
Amazing.
job at this DoD agency.
Amazing.
They paid for me to get a master's in defense strategic studies, something again that I was like,
Wow.
why would I ever do that? But, I learned really everything about chem biodefense on the job, but I realized I wanted to understand more of the policy behind it. And so they started while I was at DITRA a master's program and fully funded. Again, one of the benefits of the government. And I was able to get a master's in that and, learn more about the policy. So yeah, just can't recommend the Presidential
No,
Management Fellows program enough.
that is so cool. But now we have to get to the hook, the job that made me go, oh my gosh. Tell us what you can without having to kill us about the Secret Service.
That's funny. Yeah, people are always so intrigued.
Right.
I think I was at Citra maybe 5 years before I was like, okay, I would like to try something different. So I always explain DITRA, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, as sort of the NIH of
Mm-hmm.
the Chem Biodefense program. So very early research, which was great. I was just like, well, I'd like to do something, manage some efforts that are closer to actually getting out the door, right? Because early research, it could be another 20 years before you ever see,
Totally.
anything. So saw an announcement in USA Jobs. So this was my first foray into USA Jobs for Secret Service. And the title of it was chemist. And I was just like, why does Secret Service need a chemist? I was like, well, I'm a chemist. I'll just apply. And, I think the job description was very vague, but at the time I'm like, it's Secret Service. They can't really say what it is because it's a secret, right? So I applied. Go to the interview, and it's at a non, I kid you not, a nondescript building.
Of course.
There was, like no, there was an address, but when I walk in, it wasn't like it said Secret Service, right? That's not at all what the building was. Walk in, going for the interview, and so they're asking me questions about what I was currently doing at Ditcher. So I'm explaining to them, my old program manager. They're like, okay. They're like, well, um, this job is pretty much the same. I was like, same how? Like what? Program manager? Like, yeah, something like that. I was like, oh, okay, interesting.
Tell you?
Um, no, there was like, oh, it's something similar. I was like, okay, well, that's fine. It's a secret. They can't say, right? And so I was like, oh, so where is the building I'll be working at? So they kind of look at each other like, not too far from here. I was just like, okay, this is very
Okay.
weird, but okay, fine. And so they offered me the job, and I took it just because I was like, wow, this is
I
gonna be
have to
so
know.
cool, right? Like it's the Secret Service, right? So I go through the whole process, and then I show up at Secret Service headquarters the first day because that's where you show up your first day. I will say there's an amazing museum inside there, which is open to the public. Most people don't know this. It's so
It's
the
also
Secret
secret.
Service, actually started to handle like counterfeit money. Like that's really the basis of it, and so the original like chemistry side of it was how can you determine if bills are real or not. So that's really what they were focused on. And
Okay.
then, at some point, I don't remember when, that's when it went to like the protective service that they added on to it or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So after my first day at the headquarters building, they said, oh, okay, so you're actually going to be in a laboratory not too far from here. I was like, laboratory, interesting. Okay. So what I ended up actually doing was I started off as the quality manager for the White House mail screening facility. Um, so, of course, after, Amerithrax, right, the anthrax letters and all that sort of stuff, the government realized we need to have some sort of screening. We can't just have people sending stuff, directly to leaders. It's not going to work. And so, really, I think just about every agency has their own screening facility. And so that includes the White House as well. So, just FYI, if you send something to the president, just know it's likely going to be read and or
Mm-hmm.
screened before it actually gets to him, just as a
I
safety
would
precaution.
expect. I would
Uh,
expect that.
you would be surprised. Some people don't know this. Like people send all kinds of crazy things to leaders, and it's ridiculous. But yeah, so I was the quality manager. I helped get their first ISO accreditation, and then I moved on to being the junior government laboratory manager there. So screening, the mail as well as any gifts that the president receives for ChemBio Red Nuke threats. And so I was able again to utilize my background as a chemist, pulled in some biotechniques that I hadn't done since graduate school as well. But yeah, it was really cool. I probably would say the most interesting part of the job for me was meeting the actual agents themselves, because
Hmm.
these are like unbelievable human beings who without hesitation have said they're going to put their life on the line to protect someone else. And just talking to them about that and about how, a lot of times that affects their personal relationships, like they're not able to be in a stable relationship because they're following this other person. So, I mean, it was cool. Had an opportunity to do some training with them, some explosives training.
No way.
So yeah, that was pretty cool. But the job itself, I mean, the mission was amazing, right? To know, like, again, it doesn't get more real world than this.
Yeah.
To be able to, actually intercept, potentially, troublesome items before they actually got to leaders. It was amazing work. But, again, for someone who realized the first week of graduate school that I didn't want to do bench research, there was this tension there that here I am now back in the laboratory.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's really the only reason why I left the job. The people are amazing. The agents, like, they are amazing people, dedicated to the mission, and a lot of fun too.
I mean, personally, I think you're underselling this. I would have been like, yes, I did save the leader of the free world several times. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You want to get to the president? You got to go through me. Like, I would sell this much bigger than you are, Kristen.
No, I mean it was definitely a lot of fun. I was able, which I thought was crazy, right? So as a Secret Service employee, you have to go through a full scale polygraph.
Sure.
like it's, but so
It's
once
like
you do that, then yeah, you get, which was crazy in and of itself, right? Because like they tell you don't do any background research on like the whole poly. But of course, I was like, what? Now I have to see
I have
what
to.
what does the internet say, right? And they're
Right.
just like sit on a penny or something to help. I don't even understand what it was supposed to do. It was supposed to, I think, lower your respiratory rate. I don't understand why or how, but that's supposed to help you, I guess, not panic or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
Doing this,
Because
it was ridiculous.
don't they base it on like your heart rate, like because
Exactly. And
people
so
because
they're,
that will go up if you're lying. But I
if
mean,
you're
if you're
lying,
freaking out because you're getting a lie detector test by the Secret Service, then yeah, everything's gonna sound like a lie.
yeah,
Like,
it was absolutely insane. But so basically, once you do that, then you get a badge. You can go to I could go to the White House whenever I felt like it, which I thought
it's
was crazy.
awesome.
Like I could just walk in and no one would question me because I had the Secret Service badge. So I was able to give tours to my family. The White House garden tours, was able to do that. The
Oh,
Pope came, while I was there, so was able to participate in that
so
as
cool.
well. I got a chance to see I guess, all the retired presidential limos. So yeah, like again,
Wow,
amazing people, great time,
that is
thoroughly
badass.
enjoyed it.
Did you get to meet the president?
I did not, which
Mm,
is crazy. Yeah, the entire time I was there. I think because like our site wasn't anywhere near the White House.
okay.
Um, like we just never, yeah, we just
Mm,
never got a chance.
oh,
But I did get a Christmas card.
oh, perfect. That's a good.
Yeah,
That's something.
yeah.
So I have to ask because everyone watches like the Secret Service like based TV shows, movies. We're going to go back to basically our soap operas. And so, for example, actually, when I was in grad school, my friends and I used to play a drinking game. Whenever we would watch like any of the CSI shows, like our favorite was CSI Miami because like the science was so bad, the lines were so cheesy, and I mean, I
Mhm.
would always tell people like no one looks that good working in a laboratory, and no one can take like a small sample, like a fraction of a cell, and then all of a sudden just magic happens and there's a picture of your perp like on screen. That is not how any of this happens. So I have to ask, what I guess, like, is there anything that you see on TV now where you're like, oh my god, that is so wrong? Or is there any show that gets it like kind of right? Like, yeah, that is kind of what it's like working in the clandestine services.
Um, so what was like all the depictions of like Langley and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
There was one show, I can't remember what it was. I do think they actually went to Langley and
Okay.
got a clip because that was accurate. I guess the other thing I'll say is that the the actual members of the team that are, I guess, not on, on the books or whatever, like they do all at least go by single syllable names, right? Because I can remember like
Oh
at the
my god.
training, like we asked the guy, so what's your name? Bill. Bill what? Just Bill.
Just
What's your name? Bob. Like everyone's name. Yep. Like that,
I'm
that's not your
Joe.
real name,
Oh
right?
my
Like,
god.
so
This is
that is true.
that's so cool. Were there a lot of other like women that you worked with? Because it sounds like mostly guys. Again.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I mean, yeah, definitely Secret Service is very male dominated, especially on the agent side.
I
Um,
bet.
I'm trying to think. There were two female agents that I did meet. I think they're trying.
Yeah.
They're trying to recruit. And then on the science side, not at all.
Wow.
I mean, yeah, you're aware. It's just science in general, especially I think getting women to recognize that there are jobs other than just academia.
Right.
That's
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 why
a
I have this
struggle too.
podcast.
Yes.
I wanted to do this like essentially all my guests are women, and I want to talk about the things that we think about, when I talk about, traveling all the time, like how what like, do you have mom guilt when you go away every week, and what is it like? How do you balance work and life? And I mean, and these stories just tend to come out as we talk about like our time in grad school and our time in a postdoc, and um, always seeing all the panels just full of like older white men, and you're just like, okay, when's it going to be our turn? And how do you, I don't know, how do you deal with imposter syndrome and all these topics? I don't necessarily set out to talk about these things, but they just come up,
Mm-hmm.
and how do you balance, especially in a position like you were in, how do you balance being very like confident in your job, but likable? I mean, like, these are weird things that like women have to think about,
Yes,
so
absolutely.
I hear you completely. So I
Absolutely.
guess, so now you're at ARPA-H with me,
Mhm.
and again, that stands for Advanced Research Projects Agency for Healthcare, and we have the same job title, right? We're both CETAs.
Yes.
This is gonna. I thought so. I just wanted to check. So that's a science engineering technical assistant, and essentially, and it's funny because one of the things I have to tell people when they ask me, well, what do you do now? What's your job title? It's not like industry, because in industry you're constantly chasing, you're an MSL, then you're senior MSL, or you're a medical director, or, at one time I was the director of global medical affairs for glaucoma, and my college friends called me the high priestess of glaucoma, which I did not dissuade. I absolutely loved being referred to as the global medical
That's
director.
funny.
But now, or the high priestess, I'll take that too. But now I'm like, yeah, so I'm technically a science assistant. And they're like, oh, what is, like, but no, it's totally different. It's like, I'm one of two people on this team who are responsible for finding the investigators, finding the research. Certain, like, I'm on Google Scholar constantly, looking for new biomarkers or other KOLs, and where's that person located, and where did they go, and let's arrange a call with that person, and is that the technology that we want, or is there anyone that's doing something more closely related? And it's so involved. And when people ask me, how's the new job, like, oh my god, it's incredible, because it's stuff that I've never been exposed to in my life. And like I said before, these are some of the most intelligent people I have ever met. And so I really wanted to get you on here to talk about how you started doing that just straight out of grad school, and how you got set on this path. It's incredible. That's so cool.
Yeah,
So
I still, I think about it now and it's like how did I, like, I never would have thought when I graduated that
mhm,
I would end up doing this.
right. So then, besides, aside from your route, so in my case, I was recruited by someone who I used to work with at Bausch and Lomb. He's now a program manager at ARPA-H, and so he reached out to me and said, "Hey, I am doing this thing. It's going to be incredible, and I would love your help." And so I said, "Okay." So that's how I got my job. But I guess, like, and it seems like a lot of the other CETAs that I talked to, either they were recruited by like a former PI, or they had an NIH postdoc, and that kind of led to this, or they've had relatives. Again, they've had relatives working at DARPA or some of the other agencies, and so they've kind of known about this career path for a long time. But have you heard of any other ways? Like, how else do people find out about these types of available positions?
Yeah, so I actually found out on LinkedIn, but not
Okay.
because ARPA-H had made a LinkedIn post. Someone at, the company that I'm working at now
Hmm.
made a post saying, "Hey, I'm hiring for these jobs at ARPA-H." And I knew her from my previous days
Hmm.
at Ditch. So I do think it is a lot of, or definitely you have to know someone to even know about ARPA-H, just because, it
Yeah.
is such a new agency.
Totally.
And then, so yeah, it really is, I think, word of mouth and really networking.
Hmm.
Other than that, I do know that, they are doing a lot of like road shows, presentations at conferences and stuff. Like, they really are trying to get people to recognize, this is an opportunity to really make a big impact and help. And it's
Yeah.
not like other agencies, right? Because you hear government and people are like, oh, bureaucracy, and no one really wants to deal with that, right? But I think, that's really the message, is that's not ARPA-H, right? We're saying, let's put all of that aside, and let's really try to tackle the problem in new and creative ways. Yeah.
Yeah, taking risks, doing things differently, or high risk, high reward programs versus what something that the NIH would be willing to fund, or
Hmm.
Department of Veterans Affairs, NSF, any of them. So that's what I think really attracts me to this agency, and I can only hope that this just continues to flourish, because if we've had something like, yeah, I tell people it's like DARPA for healthcare, and if we've had DARPA for how many decades, creating all these incredible things, and why we should definitely let this aspect of doing the same thing for health and for people, it should succeed for even longer, I think, than for defense. That's just my
Yeah.
opinion.
And then 20 years from now, we can say, we were here at the beginning.
I know, right? Isn't that cool? So then, for people who are still in school right now, but maybe are listening to this and thinking, wow, that sounds really cool. Like, I like to ask people, I like to ask my guests, what could those trainees be doing now? Like, they're toiling away at the bench, not making any money, dreaming about opening a bakery, or a coffee shop. What else could they be doing with their time, maybe to prepare themselves for a career path like yours?
Yeah, so I would say, get involved in something outside of research,
Okay.
whether that's your some civic organization, or even on campus, the student government association, that sort of thing. Because I will say the Presidential Management Fellows Program is really looking for leaders and leadership qualities. And so
Mhm.
if all you have on your CV or your resume is that, it's great, yes, you published in high impact journals, but that's all you did the
Right.
entire duration of your graduate career, right? So
Mhm.
get out there, volunteer, start organizations, right? Like, if you see a need, create it. So that's really what I would say. Because I think my advisor at the time, I think he even told me, he was like, do you really want to be in graduate school? Because I was just involved in so many other things. But, that's why I was like, I'm glad someone thinks my career trajectory has been, good. Because at the time I was just like, well, I just know I'm interested in doing these things. I don't really
Mhm.
know why or how it's all going to come together, but
Sure.
it has. Because all those things that I was involved in graduate school, I genuinely believe that is the reason why I was named a fellow, is because I had that track record of actually caring about the community and public service, because that is what a job in the federal government is. It is a public service. You are tied to the mission. So whatever you can do now as a graduate student to demonstrate that, whatever your passion is, if it's tutoring, if it's picking up extra hours as a graduate assistant, whatever that is, let that be reflective, in your CV.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's good advice, definitely for trainees, but I think for everybody at any level, because I mean, I've talked to women who have, like, essentially, in many ways, like being a career person, and in some cases being a mom, and being a daughter and stuff, like these things kind of tend to take up so much of our lives, and if our jobs aren't really fulfilling us, then I've had women say to me, like, I need to maybe find another job, I'm just not super happy, and I've said, well, maybe try volunteering. I mean, there's so many women's organizations. I mean, certainly in ophthalmology, we have a bunch. I'm sure, women engineers, and, women in
Yep.
chemistry is probably something like that. I mean,
Mhm.
they're all over the place, and you can volunteer to plan events, or, um, review grants or abstracts for the next meeting, and things like that. And one of the things that I actually do that I find a ton of fulfillment in is I volunteer for the American Association of University Women, AAUW, and they have fellowships for, let me see, medical students, MBAs, lawyers. There's a few architects, and there's a few different paths. Like, if you need 25K or something like that to help pay for tuition, you can apply for a grant. And I mean, talk about inspiring. Some of these women have been civically minded their entire lives, and even from the
Mhm.
time they were in high school, they were, raising money for some pediatric cancer foundation or whatever. And you're like, geez, when I was in high school, I was hanging out at the mall with my friends being completely useless. So it is just incredible to read some of these stories. But um, volunteer experience or experience outside the lab, outside your job is definitely going to be a huge CV booster. And the other thing I want to say about that is I read a post recently on LinkedIn, and the person said, this is kind of how you can show that you're a self-starter.
Mhm.
And when it comes to interviews and stuff, it's really difficult. And when everyone always says, like, well, we want experience. Well, if everyone wants experience, then how do you get your first
Yep.
experience? And this is one way to at least say, look, maybe I don't have the experience doing this particular job, but I have experience getting people together. I have experience, setting up a budget and managing a project from start to finish, from stakeholders up until the very last step. And it's I think if anything, it's a good way to market yourself and learn these other skills
Absolutely.
while you're in school. So I think that's a fabulous suggestion. What else have people done that kind of make them stand out to you, either as other potential presidential fellows or as potential coworkers, employees of yours? Like, how else can people stand out to you?
So I guess I'll share some advice that my first boss at Ditcher gave me, and
Mm-hmm.
that is be willing to take the assignments that no one else wants, right? Like be the first person to volunteer for that.
Wow.
Not only does it show that you're a team player, that sort of thing, people remember that too, and
Yes.
it also shows that there's nothing too small or too menial that for you to do. Like you really are genuinely there to do the work. I think I've carried that with me in every job that I've done. Is that pay attention. You know, you're in a meeting and your boss asks, "Hey, can someone put together the spreadsheet?" Of course, no one really wants to do a spreadsheet, right? Gauge the room. No one wants to do it. Sure. Yes. Happy
Mm-hmm.
to do so.
That's a great idea.
Then yeah, especially if you're just starting,
Mm-hmm.
it also kind of builds that rapport with the teams. They know, oh, actually, I can trust you to do something larger as well. So yeah, I think that's something else people could do. Be willing
That's
to
great advice.
take the task that no one else wants to do.
Resume wise, cover letter wise, is there anything that people can do to help themselves stand out during the interview process?
Yeah.
Everybody.
So yeah. So government resumes are very different, I think, than industry.
Mm,
As I said, right, especially if you're going through a USA Jobs approach, you really do need to have all of the keywords in
mm.
your resume. And I just recently saw that they've actually now had to add a disclaimer saying that just copying and pasting them into your resume will not, you know, uh, that I won't check the box. Because I do
Darn.
think, again, right, like people were just kind of gaming the system. So
Mhm,
you actually have to have the experience.
mhm.
So I think paying attention to actually what the job description is asking for and making sure that it is explicit in your CV how you meet those qualifications. Because unfortunately, again, right, the first step is that the computer is reading this and
Yeah.
seeing, do you have those words? Does it match that sort of thing? Interview wise, I think most interviews today, not just the government across the board, use the STAR method, right? Situation, task, action, result. So
Okay.
they're all situational interviews. And so you're going to get asked the same questions in whatever interview you have. Give me a time where you faced adversity and overcame it, right? Don't just start talking. Think through, describe the situation. What was the task that you were asked to do? What action did you take? And what was the result? Frame your responses to every single question using that, because I can guarantee you that is how the interviewers are going to be measuring your responses. They're saying, okay, did they use this method? So, yeah,
Yeah.
something else to keep in mind.
So this is really good, tangible advice. I appreciate that. Is there anything else you want to share with the audience, or any other advice, or how can people find you if they want to learn more about you and presenting
Yeah.
exacts in their mail, or
Yeah, don't do it. Don't send
don't
coffee
send
beans
baby
through the
powder
mail.
even.
Yeah, just know someone is reading it, and you're probably going to make someone's day be a lot longer than it should be because now they're going to run all these extra tests to prove that it was baby powder and nothing else.
Uh,
But besides that, no, just I distinctly remember how discouraged I felt in graduate school, seeing my other classmates who were super excited about this potential career in academia, and then I was like,
mhm.
I don't want to do that at all.
Yeah.
Just and knowing that I had other interests, just understand that you are not alone. There are hundreds, if not thousands of us out here who felt the exact same way. And
Yep.
we are still out here in the workforce, excited about the work that we're doing, utilizing our degree. So, don't give up, stay motivated. There are other options out there. You shouldn't feel bad for wanting a different career. I think Cynthia, you and I were talking about this, right? Like at this point, I think, yeah, you'd said it's not really an alternative career since there are so few positions in academia now. Like these are the careers that are out there.
These are the careers.
This is it. Yeah, so just talk to people.
Yeah.
Don't belittle your experience. You have the experience that's necessary for whatever career that you ultimately want to end up doing. So yeah, that's my advice. If
I love it.
anyone wants to reach out, I'm on LinkedIn, Kristen Herring. Um, I try to check it at least a couple times a week, but if I don't respond, I'm not ignoring you. I just haven't looked at
Yeah.
it.
Awesome. Awesome. And I can't tell you how great it's been to talk to you and to get all of this advice. This has been absolutely wonderful. Kristen, thank you for being on the podcast today. I so appreciate it.
Thanks for the invite.
Of course. Thank you. I want to thank Dr. Kristen Herring again for coming on today's episode and telling us more about her, again, fascinating career path. And I just want to emphasize again, there are opportunities and you are qualified for all the opportunities. So just go for it. Just apply, be brave, and you never know what could happen. So thank you for listening and see you next time.